Welcome to Sanctuary Speaker Series. My name is Nzinga Young, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Experience here at Farm Sanctuary. In honor of Women's History Month, we're joined by two women who are making a difference in animal rights and impact investing. Alicia Robb is both the founder and CEO of Next Wave Impact and the research director at Cruelty-Free Investing. Alicia has a PhD in economics and has worked in research and policy for more than 20 years with groups like the Kauffman Foundation and the Federal Reserve Board. She is a prolific author on topics of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance, as well as an active angel investor, a managing partner of 2 early-stage venture funds, and a lead investor for the angel group Vegan Investors. She's a board member for several groups and has been honored by the Angel Capital Association for her work promoting impact investing and racial and gender equality. Alicia will be interviewed by Farm Sanctuary's very own Megan Watkins, who held senior roles in philanthropic advisory and wealth management at Bank of America Private Bank and JP Morgan before joining us as Farm Sanctuary's CEO. Most recently, she led the development of a national philanthropic practice that guided family, corporate, and institutional foundations through the design of high-impact giving programs. Megan graduated from Barnard College and holds a master's degree from Columbia University. I now welcome Alicia Robb and Megan Watkins.
Thank you so much, Nzinga, and welcome, Alicia. We are so thrilled to have you with us today. There is so much that we could be talking about in the hour that we have, and we thought that we would spend a little bit of time focusing first on your background, talking a little bit about maybe just a basic intro to impact investing, why it's so relevant in our space. And then, given the importance of the topic around women and impact investing in women's leadership, maybe spend a few minutes there before we talk about accountability, what everyone here with us today can take away from this session, what we can all do a little bit differently in furtherance of the kind of world that we all want to take part in building. So with that, why don't we get started with having you tell us a little bit about your journey within the impact investing world, how your focus has evolved over time.
Great. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I got started in finance through microfinance in Central America as a women's empowerment tool. How do we get capital to women to give them control over their futures, and through microfinance, that's how I first got interested in that. And it kind of evolved into an interest in small business finance and entrepreneurship. So I actually, if I would have known like 10 years ago I was going to be running an impact fund, I wouldn't have seen the path. I call myself an accidental venture capitalist because I didn't take a traditional route into impact investing. I started investing really through crowdfunding with the Jobs Act in 2012. I was actually at the Kauffman Foundation. Most of my professional career has been as an economist doing research in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance. But I did start investing through crowdfunding, which allowed everyday people to do investing through platforms. And through that, then I became an angel investor and started investing in private companies. And I became a venture capitalist because I was doing research on the gender and racial gaps in entrepreneurship and looked into the racial and gender gaps in entrepreneurial finance as investors. And those gaps are even bigger, and they're very much related. Right? You often hear, less than 3% of venture capital goes to female CEOs. And one reason is because most of the venture capitalists are white men. And we like to invest in things and people that look like us. And so one way to get more capital to women and people of color is to get more women and people of color on the investing side. So I piloted a fund with 99 women using my research in how do we get more women and people of color into investing and getting over the barriers that prevent a lot of people from investing when they could. And from there, I realized I didn't just want to invest in women and people of color, but I wanted to invest in companies that were really making a difference in social and environmental problems that we were facing. So Next Wave Impact is an impact fund, and we invest in impact companies. And we have 99 women investors in our fund, 25 of them women of color. So we're having an impact not just in the kinds of companies that we invest in, but also by bringing more women and people of color into the ecosystem as investors.
Amazing. Amazing. And I love, well, it's funny, both of us actually started out in microfinance. But before we dive into deep into the topic of impact investing, I actually want to pause for a minute because when we first met, you told me that you were actually just joining the board of a farm animal sanctuary. And I don't want to miss having the opportunity to highlight that before we dive in, because I love that we're focused on kind of the big picture systems investment dialogue, but I also don't want to lose that we're two people here who obviously have a great affinity for farm animals and certainly are both in the sanctuary space. So would love to hear just a little bit about that.
Sure. Love and Arms is a Colorado farm animal sanctuary. It was started in 2015 and is in Erie, Colorado, which is just east of Boulder, Colorado. So yeah, I just joined the board, and I joined the board for a few reasons. One, I wanted to marry my interest in animal rights with, my skill set, and had been on a nonprofit board prior, Compassion Without Borders in California, run by a vegan vet. And I was looking for an opportunity because the boards I'm on now are mainly finance and impact fund boards. And so I really wanted an opportunity to use my skills for something I feel very passionate about, which is animal rights and, farm sanctuaries as a tool for education and outreach and advocacy. I love in the mission of Love and Arms is the precept of ahimsa and nonviolence towards all living beings. So it was a natural fit, and yeah, I'm excited to be on board there.
No, thank you for sharing that. And they're absolutely lucky to have you. And I'm looking forward. We can revisit that a little bit later too. Okay, let's dive into impact investing. And for those who are with us who maybe haven't spent a lot of time with the topic, but just heard, even in just your introductory remarks, so many compelling points about what this big world of impact investing has to do with helping us to create this more equitable, more compassionate, more just world. Help me break it down for the people who are tuning in today. What do we mean by impact investing? Why is it so important to think about impact investing as a strategy, as a tool, as we think about building toward this better world?
Sure. Well, it's not a new practice. I mean, values aligned investing, can be traced back to the 1700s with the Quakers who, prohibited their members from investing in businesses that supported the slave trade. More recently in the US, you can think about the Vietnam War when there was a movement away from, weapons producers, or in the 80s with, apartheid and divesting from companies that supported them. And impact investing now is so much more developed as a field, but yet it's still new. When you think about impact investing, you're thinking about investing your money in ways that have social and environmental returns and not just financial returns. So that's everything from, your cash to your stock market to bonds, etc. We can talk about the different asset classes, but really you're looking for your money to have social and environmental benefits. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about SRI, sustainable and responsible investing. That's more like, just a negative screen. You want to keep things out of your portfolio that, like weapons or tobacco, all the way through investing in, companies that are actually finding solutions to real problems. So, well, we can talk about that more, but, even as individual purchasers, where we spend our money, makes a difference. And so who are you buying from? Are you buying from Main Street? Are you buying from Amazon? Like, who are you supporting with your consumer dollars? It's not just your investment dollars, but money has impact.
Well, that is something that I have heard you say, that kind of everything that we do has an impact, right? When we think about, just as you were saying, the dollars we spend or we save, that anything could potentially have an impact, positive or negative. So, can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, for those who are joining today who think, okay, well, I've got a savings account, or here's, one of the purchasing decisions I may have made, but maybe help me think about that a little bit in terms of the kind of impact someone might want to create with what it is that they do have.
Sure. I think one of the great things about impact investing is so many people think about investing in philanthropy in two different buckets of money, right? I make money in the stock market and then I use those gains and donate them. But what if you're investing in companies that have detrimental effects on the economy or on the planet or on animals, and then you're using those profits to support a farm sanctuary? That makes no sense, right? So how can we look at where our money is right now, and is it having a positive impact, or are we supporting things that aren't aligned with our values? So for example, banking, where are you banking? Where does your money spend the night? Because you're not investing it. You have it in a bank and you're earning 0.001%. Well, the bank is lending your money out and investing in things and making money on your money. So where are they putting that money? Are they investing in oil and gas? Are they investing in tobacco? Are they investing in the private prison system? So looking at even where you're holding your cash, you can have a significant difference. You can be putting your money into local credit unions or community development financial institutions, and not in a bank that's doing bad things with your money.
Hmm. That's interesting. And I feel as though for some who maybe a decade or two ago, and certainly in the realm of microfinance, you heard a lot about credit unions, and there was a lot of work that's happening in partnership with credit unions. You think about credit unions now as an option or as an alternative. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, where you've seen kind of the reemergence of credit unions as you think about where people are placing dollars in terms of savings accounts and other items?
Yeah, well, I do think more and more people are realizing, hey, where is my money spending the night? And so whether it's a local community bank or a credit union, um, you know, for example, like self-help credit union and clean energy credit union, these are credit unions that really are aligned with a lot of people's values of wanting to invest in clean energy or in community development. And so, as a client with them, that they're using your savings to make small business loans to women and people of color, or they're investing in loans for solar projects. So it's a win-win. And there's a lot of options out there now in terms of no matter where you are. The clean energy credit union is only online, so you can be anywhere and use that. Self-help, again, from most states, you can become a member. So it really is opens up these kinds of options for everyone, no matter where you live.
And like you were saying, not just screening out the bad, kind of proactively identifying what are some of those things that you really do want to support. So if we take that a step further, you were mentioning earlier some of the other asset classes. Maybe we can just talk for a few minutes about building beyond that place of cash and thinking about even into the cruelty-free, or some of the vegan, some of the plant-based spaces.
Sure. So um, one of the things I'm involved with is Cruelty Free Investing, which is a nonprofit that actually lists all the publicly traded stocks on the various stock markets and classifies them into those that exploit animals and those that don't. So you can see actually if you do hold individual stocks in the stock market, are they exploiting animals or not? We also have a resource page there that lists a lot of options that are either wealth managers that are vegan or have a vegan screen. There's actually a vegan ETF now on the publicly traded markets, which is actually doing quite well. So there's a lot of uh, stocks that you can actually buy that are cruelty free, but there's a lot more options to diversify your risk by investing in exchange traded funds or mutual funds that create a basket of stocks to really diversify your risk. Just like in early stage investing, across the different asset classes. One of the most risky is the early stage. And so you want to diversify within that asset class as well. You wouldn't want to hold all your money in one public stock. That's just very risky. And so by diversifying across a number of ETFs or mutual funds, you can actually do a screen now on what kinds of impact you'd like to make. And there are ETFs and mutual funds out there that have an impact lens, gender lens, you name it. So there's a lot more opportunities in the last 5 or 10 years than there were 10 or 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And as you think about how your role, when you mentioned up front about your role as an angel investor or identifying some of these opportunities, especially in the animal rights or vegan space, maybe just talk a little bit about that for this audience. How accessible are those kinds of opportunities? What are some of the things that you look for? What inspires you as you're looking in particular at the vegan, the plant-based, the animal rights kind of opportunities?
Sure. Well, up until recently, it was really restricted to accredited investors, those investors that met a threshold on income or wealth. So right now, the definition is 200,000 in income or 300,000 per household, not in the last 2 years, or $1 million or more in assets, not including your primary residence. And so that is a kind of a self-accreditation, but you have to be accredited to do early stage investing. But with the Jobs Act in 2012, it really opened it up in terms of allowing folks to do early stage investing, both from crowdfunding and just through the regulation. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities in this space, whether you have a little bit of money or a lot of money. I mean, there's in crowdfunding, you can go on to platforms like Republic or WeFunder, and I a Google or a search on vegan companies, and I've probably supported 10 or 20 in the past 5 or 10 years. And you can invest as little as $100 or $1,000 in these companies. So that's one way. And then, as you mentioned, I'm an angel investor and run a vegan syndicate, Vegan Angel Investors, veganinvestors.com. And we are a group of investors that are looking to invest in vegan-led vegan companies. So there's a lot of entrance into the vegan space because it is so hot right now, and everybody, with the Beyond IPO, recently. I think there's a lot of people getting into this space to make money and aren't necessarily values aligned. And so we're really looking for vegan-led vegan companies in order to support their growth and scaling and hopefully wealth accumulation into the vegan community so we can do more with our dollars.
That's amazing. Well, and I think, we intentionally chose this topic and wanted to invite you as a speaker for the month of March. It's Women's History Month. We wanted to highlight women's leadership. And certainly in this realm, I think speaking about you and speaking about women generally, women have really championed impact investing. There has been so much development within the space that has been led by women. You think about women, becoming the primary wealth holders in this country, what that could potentially mean for this space. So as you start to think about the confluence of, what you've been doing in the vegan investment space, your role as a woman leader, with these other women who have been driving an impact and thinking about, all of the positive implications for the field, in particular as all of these issues start to come together, right, for women who are leading in this space, thinking about the issues you mentioned around equity, around gender, around potentially how those issues tie back to the food system or animal rights. How excited are you about the role of women, as you see the space further developing? Where do you see that maybe women are or aren't as present as you would like to see?
Well, I mean, even within the animal rights movement, we see that women don't have as central of a role as we might think, given we make up the majority of vegetarians and vegans and animal rights activists. But in leadership, there are many, but men seem to have the louder voices and higher visibility. And I think the same is true in the vegan investing. Certainly there's several women involved, but the larger funds are run by men. So I'm excited to see the women that are in the field. Women in finance is obviously a minority, but I'm excited to see that there are so many women that are dipping their feet in the water. And part of the goal with Next Wave and mobilizing women was because we really wanted to invest in and help scale women-led companies so that they would be successful women entrepreneurs, and then they would go and then become early stage investors, board members, advisors, mentors, co-founders of new companies, and really build the leadership capacity in this ecosystem. And I see the same thing in the vegan world as well, in terms of vegan companies. And certainly most of the large ones are still run by men, but I think we just need to be more purposeful and strategic and investing in women and people of color so that there is more racial and gender equity in the space.
No, it's a really great point. And I think if we dig into that even a little bit deeper, where does that investment then take us, right? Why is it so important that women take up more space in this conversation? People of color are so present in this conversation, and the kind of lasting change that can be created. I mean, you just alluded to some of that, right? Is the gender lens investing, or women investing in women and girls, and then what is likely to happen as women invest in women and girls, and similarly now in the vegan space. I suppose it could be easy to think about investing in one company, but the way that you describe it, this ecosystem, as you put it, which I think is a great way to think about it, it really is it's a systemic shift, right? It's really feeding into a systems change.
Well, and you come from microfinance as well. And the whole thesis behind this was women were great investments because they used their wealth to then invest in their families and their communities. And investments in men weren't necessarily as good of investments. And so it's the same thing here. We really need to, yeah, as you said, the systems and structures that have led us to where we are is not working for any of us, right? It's destroying the planet. It is creating wealth inequality on the likes that we've never seen. And, what are we leaving for the next generation? I mean, we really need to stop looking at the business world as profit at all costs, and really shift to a more sustainable and equitable path forward, or none of us will be around in a few generations.
Yeah. When you think about what it's going to take to make that happen, I mean, who's missing from these conversations, right? As you were mapping out where the most, the wealth, or the decisions, not the wealth itself, but the decisions around wealth and how that wealth is deployed, maybe sitting now as opposed to where that's shifting. As we think about who's missing from the conversation, who's missing from the table, and you mentioned people of color, and I think we both acknowledge, the two of us here today, still a challenge, right? And who is at the table and who isn't for this conversation. How do we help to design more of an inclusive conversation and solution set? And what do you see out there that's developing in that regard?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. When you look at the amount of capital we're talking about, I think it was like $715 billion was invested in impact investing in 2020. But by 2030, women are expected to control $30 trillion. And so if we have control of that, I mean, that is so powerful. I mean, think about that. But, when we think about, for example, the income inequality, we make 82 cents on the dollar compared to men, and yet men retire, I think, with 3 times what women do, even though we save more. We tend to not invest in riskier things, and men do, and their wealth accumulates. And so I think one thing that we need to do is really get women more comfortable with money and investing. The whole model behind Next Wave Impact was really a learning by doing model with a low investment threshold to get in, mentoring, education and training, a diversified portfolio with your investment. And so it's really getting women comfortable to learn how to do it and to build a diversified portfolio. So I think more things like that. For the vegan investors group, one reason we did this was because a lot of companies, when they're raising money, they require a minimum of $50,000 to $100,000 of investment per person. And so many angel investors like me don't have the kind of wealth to be investing in 100K into every single company. And so how do you build a portfolio with those kinds of minimums? And so with vegan investors, we put together special purpose vehicles to aggregate smaller investors. So you can put 5 or 10 or 20K into a company. You put it into this SPV, and then we aggregate a number of people into it, and then make an investment of 100 or 200K with this special purpose vehicle, which is a LLC. And that way people can come in at a lower amount and build a diversified portfolio over time, with a reasonable amount of money.
Well, that's a great explanation. And I was going to make you go back to SPV and define it. So thank you for doing that. So when you think about, I mean, there's no shortage of creative, innovative business ideas, solutions, entrepreneurs. I feel as though, we've started to see with Vegan Women's Summit, with other groups that have been kind of cropping up and presenting the world with these incredible opportunities to invest in women as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, as sector leaders. It doesn't feel like there's a shortage of investment opportunities, and it doesn't feel like there is a shortage in the market fund these opportunities, and yet somehow we're still building that bridge for those two to meet. And I think the work that you're doing in that regard is remarkable. And so thank you for not only for doing it, but for bringing it to us today, and for talking about some of the partners who you've been working with to accomplish that, because it's something that feels like in many ways should be readily achievable, but maybe we're not paying attention.
It's certainly achievable, but yeah, I mean, it takes a purposeful action. You have to be really strategic. With my pilot fund, we really didn't have that many women of color. And so we had to be really purposeful and strategic and recruit women of color to be in the fund, because they don't just necessarily just show up. Our networks are, often people like us. And so a lot of white people don't have many people of color in their networks. And so really being strategic and reaching out and being more proactive in building this community to make it more inclusive.
Yeah, well, and that's a great action step to kind of lead us into the types of things that our audience can do. Each of us as individuals, whether we're one individual, whether we are a business owner, whether we're on the board of an organization or a company, how we think about accountability, what we put ourselves on the hook for, whether it's today or at some point in the near future, what are some of the action steps that we can each take? And I wonder if we could go back to kind of your initial framing of the different asset classes and kind of think about what are some potential action steps, whether that's starting with where you keep your money and what you say to your bank or your advisor or the person who's telling you, this might not create returns for you, or sorry, you can't find that here, all the way through maybe some of the more institutional opportunities and plans.
Sure. Well, I think as individuals, or even say we're on the board of a nonprofit, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to join Love and Arms was because you hold a lot of money in an endowment or a fund for a safeguard, right, of your operating expenses. You need to have a buffer. And so where is that money being held? Is it at one of the big banks, or is it somewhere that's aligned with your values? So certainly as individuals or organizations or businesses, where we bank can have a huge impact. So looking at things like local banks, community development financial institutions, credit unions, etc., is one of the biggest things that we could do. Another asset class is cash alternatives, things that have pretty liquid that have liquidity but aren't cash. And so things like, for example, C Note is a woman-led company that uh, lends to CDFIs, which then lend to women and minority businesses. And so, but it's a quarterly liquidity. So there's options like that. So there's a book called Activate Your Money by Janine Firpo, who's one of our investment committee members with Next Wave Impact, who actually wrote a book about this across all asset classes. How do you move your assets into impact across all of your asset classes? So we talked about cash and we just talked about alternatives. Fixed income is like bonds. There's bonds that have impacts. You can do municipal bonds locally, you can do green bonds. So there's lots of options there. And then we talked about public equities in the stock market. You can pick stocks of individual companies that are aligned with your values, that are either doing environmental things or solving, societal challenges, or you can invest into ETFs or mutual funds that bring together a number of different companies that are in those spaces. So there's lots of options there. Private equity, we talked about, that's like angel investing and venture capital. Again, there's this burgeoning number of funds and angel groups that are impact focused. And so you can invest in individual companies yourself, or you can invest in funds that are doing it. When you think about your retirement, I mean, a lot of the 401k options are very limited in terms of choices, but for self-directed IRAs or SEP IRAs or individual retirement accounts, there's more and more opportunities to have a impact lens to your investment. If your 401k doesn't, it's worth going to your employer and really pushing them to really consider the option, putting options out there. You mentioned this, giving up return. There's so much research out that shows that using ESG, environmental social governance, impact investing does not mean you have to give up returns. In fact, a lot of the studies show that they are at or better returns than more traditional investments. And so don't buy that from your financial advisor or your 401k manager. The evidence is very clear that you can do well by investing in companies doing good.
Oh, that's such an important point. And I think bringing us back to the question about, the big banks, if you've got your money in a big bank, there's absolutely opportunity within the big bank, right? With whether it's the individual account or the financial advisor, there's opportunity there because, as you mentioned, these opportunities have become more accessible, more profitable. There isn't a reason now within that banking framework why there shouldn't be an opportunity there, is I think what I'm hearing you saying too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. We talked a lot about the investing piece. I mean, and we talked or touched a little bit on just kind of charitable giving generally, and how sometimes people think about them in different buckets. But back to your point just quickly, because I know a lot of the folks who join us for these conversations have been really generous supporters of Farm Sanctuary, of a number of charitable organizations. Some of them have supported us financially, whether that's outright, maybe it's through a donor advised fund, maybe it's through a foundation. But just to your point of bringing these two pieces back together again, and making that point that those underlying assets of those charitable vehicles to that feeling of wanting to align, and I do need to read this book that you're recommending, but aligning your values, with the assets, aligning the values of the charitable institution, with that investment mandate, I think it's a really important one.
And I think one thing that's really relatively new is that you can now use your donor advised fund for impact investing. So you can actually make impact investments with your donor advised fund. So you can invest, do well, and that money goes back into your DAF, and you become, it grows in value, and you can do more.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone who's listening who maybe is not as familiar with a donor advised fund, do you want to give your 2 minutes on what a donor advised fund is?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simplest quick summary is that instead of doing like a family foundation or something, you can put together a donor advised fund by donating money into like Fidelity or someone like that. But there's actually several more groups out there like Tides and Impact Assets and Triskelius Foundation, where you can actually put your money and they hold it, and then you can invest or donate from the donor advised fund. So it's just a more streamlined way of doing it rather than having like a foundation.
Yep. Right. So like a charitable giving account of sorts that you could put money into, and that money could be invested for impact while you decide where ultimately it goes.
Right. And, in some places like, Fidelity and others, you're limited in what you can do with it in terms of investing, but groups like Investor Flow and Impact Assets, you can actually have a wide variety of impact investment opportunities that you can do for investing rather than just philanthropy. I mean, obviously, philanthropy is huge and needed, and so much good is funded through philanthropy, but it can also be used in innovative ways, like as a first loss reserve to leverage more private sector money. And so there's creative ways to use it that can be longer lasting and have also a return.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we recap, I mean, I think about this and I'm thinking of, we have, I'm sure, a blended audience who's listening to this today. If we think about just again, kind of the role of women in wealth, and to your point, philanthropy and investing being such important components, right, of contributing to the evolution of the kind of world that we want to see, but all of the individual actions that one can take, whether that is using your voice to advocate, whether that's putting your dollars, where you think you feel most comfortable with your dollars, spending the night, as you say, which I love, to the different kinds of ways that you can drive change and make decisions at the institutional level that really do look to capitalize systemic change. I think you've provided us a lot of great avenues for that today.
And I think it's important to remember, if we all do it and we all demand that, groups hold, they're working for us. So we were talking about financial advisors. If they don't want to impact invest, should you dump them and go somewhere else? Yes, they should be. They're working for you, and you want to make an impact with your dollars. And if they can't help you, there are plenty of advisors that can. But I think, if all of us do it and we demand products and services in the impact space, it will increase the transition far more rapidly. And as we all know, we are a planet on fire, and we need to rapidly change this trajectory, or we're not going to survive as a species.
No, it's a tough and important statement, but is actually a perfect segue to my last question for you today, which is, we're Farm Sanctuary as an organization, we're celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. And I think about everything, that's happened over the last 35 years and building to this point, as we think about the impact investing space today, all of the developments that have happened. But given the issues that you just cited, and some of the values I know we share and some of the vision I know we share, if you look out another 35 years and you think about some of the changes, some of the ways that you hope that this field will evolve, or some of the changes that you hope you'll see with regard to shifts in the development of the sector, and I guess loosely interpreted of the sector, what do you hope that you will see? What do you hope is going to be driving us toward this more just, more compassionate world?
I'm sure a lot of the viewers are familiar with cultured meat or clean meat, and this meat alternative that is actually meat but grown in labs rather than from animals. And there's a lot of investment dollars going towards this. I actually have invested in one of the clean meat companies, but I tend to focus on plant-based and alternatives that remove animals from the supply chain. But this cultured meat, dairy, etc., I think is definitely going to be part of the future. And I think it's probably going to start with, well, I mean, there's already cultured chicken on the market in Singapore. But I think in the US, it's going to probably start with, dog and cat food that's cultured meat. And then, expand to more, more products for human consumption. In 35 years, I could see the necessity of farming animals completely gone. And that would be an ideal outcome for me, because, I know future generations are, if we survive as a species, future generations are going to look at us and the factory farming and the environmental conditions and the cruelty that has resulted with just horror. And they'll be wondering why we did this and how we could have perpetuated it and why we didn't solve this sooner. So in 35 years, I think it's entirely possible that we could be factory farm free, and those that want to have meat can eat their cultured meat, and those of us that want plant-based healthier alternatives will be doing that. But I think, the gender and racial equity piece is so important to me, and I really feel like if we're gonna survive as a cohesive society in the future, that we are going to have to solve the racial and ethnic and gender dysfunction that we have, and that we're currently facing. And it's this legacy that we inherited, but it is something that I feel like there's finally recognition of the issues, but we really do need to find solutions and create a more just and sustainable and equitable environment. And I think women are going to be a huge part of that, as are people of color, because I feel like we are more driven to racial and gender equity because we are living in a patriarchy and a racist world. So I feel like we are more driven to create the change that we want to see. So I really, it's imperative that we solve these things. And I think women and people of color are going to play a big role. And we need to, because the way it is now is completely broken, and we can't be satisfied with that.
Well, the work that you're doing, and I know some of the peers that you mentioned, the focus on equity in that work, in designing solutions that are more equitable. I get so excited, and I'm sure that the audience is so inspired hearing you say that in 35 years we could be factory farm free. And I think the second piece of what you're saying is we have to get there in an equitable and sustainable way. We have to design this in a way that really builds what we want to see and doesn't just eliminate what we don't want to see, which I think is incredibly inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing with us all of the ways that each of us can be a part of that, because that's part of the inspiration too, right? Is knowing how to engage and understanding the importance of shifting dollars, right? And shifting wealth toward this purpose, and doing so in a way that does create and promote more of that equity and designs that more inclusive, more sustainable, more just, more compassionate landscape that I know we're also passionate about. Thank you, Alicia, so much for having this conversation with me today. It is such a pleasure. And I've loved introducing, for those in our audience who have not had the opportunity to hear from you before, I'm so excited to be able to bring your voice to them. You are such an important voice and leader in this movement, be that the animal rights movement, be that veganism, be that impact investing. You have been leading this dialogue and this conversation for so long, and it's wonderful to see you out in front of this conversation and helping so many of us to learn all of the different things that we can do to play a role, no matter what size, in this movement. So thank you again for your time today and for all of your leadership.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it, and so appreciate what you do and for all of the animals and the world as well. And we need more people like you. So thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with that, we're going to close out today, and I'm going to hand it back to Nzinga.
Thank you so much for joining us. Below this video, you'll find more information on Alicia Robb and links to the many resources mentioned in this program. We hope to have you again at our next Sanctuary Speaker Series.